Welcome to The Explainer. So glad you're here with us today. We're going to dive right in and objectively break down the mechanics and, honestly, the fascinating complexities of the private prison business model. We'll be looking specifically at the Australian context, completely unpacking the data, the claims, and the financial structures detailed in a deeply compelling recent article. If you've ever wondered how the justice system intersects with corporate revenue, you are in exactly the right place.
Okay, let's dive into this. We're going to follow the money and understand the core arguments through 5 straightforward steps. First, the purpose of prison. Second, Australia's private prison boom. Third, the business of incarceration. Fourth, the rehabilitation paradox. And finally, promises versus reality. Let's get to it. Section 1, the purpose of prison. Is it punishment, rehabilitation, or profit? When most of us think about prison, we probably picture heavy iron gates shutting people away from the outside world, right? But as you'll see, there's an entirely different lens to look through here. We're going to be looking at a recent article titled Prisons for Profit, written by Shane W. Miller and published on August 1st, 2024. Throughout this explainer, we are going to impartially map out exactly what Miller presents on the page: the claims, the statistics, the logical arguments, the whole shebang. So Miller kicks things off by looking at how we usually talk about the justice system. Traditionally, if you lean right, you might view prisons as tools for punishment and deterrence. On the flip side, if you lean left, you probably see them as centers for rehabilitation. But Miller points out a hidden reality that almost no one thinks about: generating corporate profit. Most of us just assume the government handles all this, right? Well, it turns out many prisons are run by private companies. And in that system, every single inmate is quite literally a source of revenue. Section 2, Australia's private prison boom and the surprising scale of it all.
Now, when you hear private prisons, your mind probably jumps straight to the United States. But Miller's data brilliantly illustrates a really surprising disparity. Despite America's reputation, Australia actually relies on privatization twice as much. Less than 10% of the U.S. prison population is in a private facility, but in Australia, that number sits at more than 20%. Australia has embraced prison privatization more than literally any other country in the Western world.
48%. Just let that massive number sink in for a second. According to Miller, that 48% is the share of inmates returning to jail within just 2 years in New South Wales. The author makes a direct connection here, pointing out that New South Wales, a state where prison administration is heavily dominated by private companies, has the highest recidivism rate in the entire country. So who is actually running the show? The article identifies an oligopoly made up of 4 major market dominators: Serco, G4S, Geogroup, and MTC Broad Spectrum. Miller explains that these companies lock in decade-long contracts and wield enormous influence over prison administration in states like Victoria, South Australia, and New South Wales. To put the financial scale into perspective, together these 4 companies are set to rake in over $500 million this year alone. Section 3, the business of incarceration. Let's look at revenue and costs. Which naturally leads us to ask this fundamental question: how do these companies actually grow? I mean, every private business needs a growth strategy for its shareholders, right? But what on earth does growth look like when your business is human incarceration? Well, the author's conclusion is incredibly blunt. Revenue relies entirely on incarceration. Miller states that every new prisoner represents additional revenue, even comparing the system to cattle on a farm. It's a harsh reality. For these companies to grow, more people simply need to be locked up. If crime rates drop, these companies make less money because there's just less demand for their services. So the absolutely crucial thing to understand is the profit margin formula. Revenue is only half the equation. The article explains that the industry receives a fixed payment per prisoner. And because that revenue per inmate is capped, companies literally have no choice but to slash their costs if they want to grow their profit margins. Miller claims they are heavily incentivized to cut corners. We're talking inadequate staffing, slashing medical supplies, putting off necessary renovations, whatever it takes to make sure those shareholder dividends don't go down. And then there's this deeply ironic paradox that Miller highlights, which just shows the incredible reach of this for-profit system. If an inmate happens to have a superannuation or retirement account, those funds are often invested in major corporate stocks, meaning an inmate could very well have a vested financial stake in the exact same company that's currently locking them up. No way, right? It's a staggering example of how entrenched this industry is in the broader financial market. Section 4, the rehabilitation paradox. and the disincentive to reform. To really grasp this paradox, we have to look at this powerful, direct quote from Miller's text. He writes, "Rehabilitative programs that aid in reducing recidivism are viewed as financial liabilities, as they only eat into the prison's cash flow. Because of this, the source argues essential support programs get completely neglected, leaving prisoners without the actual tools they need to successfully reintegrate into society." In fact, the author uses a highly critical term for repeat offenders. He calls them cash cows. According to Miller, actually reforming someone is totally counterproductive to the business model. Think about it. The companies running these prisons stand to lose reliable, reoccurring revenue if a criminal turns their life around. The more people locked up, the better the end-of-year financial report looks. If they successfully rehabilitated every single inmate, they'd literally put themselves out of business. Section 5, Promises versus Reality. Let's look at the verdict. Let's break down the stark contrast here. When outsourcing prison management was first pitched to the public, it was sold as a way to boost efficiency, politicians promised lower costs, and expert management. And honestly, as the author points out, nobody's really rushing to stick up for convicted criminals anyway, making it an easy sell. But Miller's ultimate verdict, he says it was all a lie. According to the article, the reality is that state expenses actually went up. We're seeing higher rates of repeat offenders, compromised services, and a staggering estimated $60 billion annual cost to communities from organized crime. And it's absolutely crucial to look at where this money is actually going. Miller highlights that when these massive contracts were awarded, they largely didn't even go to Australian companies. Instead, these taxpayer-funded profits are primarily flowing right overseas, extracted by international businesses headquartered in England and the USA. Which brings us to a final, incredibly provocative thought from the author. When crime stats rise, instead of just pointing fingers at the individuals committing the crimes or blaming the bail system, should we also be scrutinizing the foreign-run entities that are literally financially incentivized to keep our prisons full? It's a powerful question about where society's accountability should truly lie. Thanks for hanging out and unpacking this explainer with me today. Keep questioning the systems around us, and until next time, keep learning.